You're listening to Mornings with Jason Matthews on Brisbane's 4BC.
Welcome back to the program, 20 past 9. Geez, you're red hot on this morning, and so you should be. So you should be. 133 882 is our open line. We'll get to some of your calls and texts. Texts are 0499 880 882, or you can email mornings@4bc.com.au. As I mentioned off the top of the show, there's major backlash today over the sentence handed to the teen who murdered grandmother Vyleen White. He got 16 years, which I thought would have been an okay sentence under the old laws. But he'll serve just 60%. I've got some comments from Justice Bowskill I'm going to get to soon. And we'll see what part of the problem is. It's less than 10 years behind bars, and he'll be out by the time he's 25. Right in the prime of his life. Premier David Crisafulli says the decision is unacceptable and the government is now looking at whether to appeal. I don't think you've got any choice, Premier. I think, going by the reaction I'm getting this morning here from the 4BC listeners, you've got to do it. Leading criminologist Terry Goldsworthy says the sentence shows exactly why the state brought in their new adult crime, adult time laws. Laws that didn't apply here because they're not retrospective. Maybe they should have been, in hindsight. Under those laws, he says the offender would have faced a much harsher sentence, minimum 20 years. So where does this leave the White family and the justice system? Professor Terry Goldsworthy joins me now. Good morning, Professor.
Yeah, good morning, Jason.
As you can see, a lot of people are peed off about this morning. What was your reaction when you saw the sentence, 16 years with a 60% period to be served?
Well, it's a bit of smoke and mirrors, I thought. I mean, the 16-year sentence appears good on face value till you see the detail that the offender only has to serve 60%. But we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, I had a look at the data from the Queensland Sentencing Council this morning, and what it shows is that, 6 juveniles have been sentenced for murder in the last 5 years. None of them have got more than 15 years, and only one of them got more than 12 years for murder. So this is in line with what we've seen in recent years. I don't think it matches community expectations. You could argue that it's manifestly inadequate, and that would be the grounds for an appeal. Whether that would be successful, I have high doubts given the fact of the sentencing trends that we've seen. And this is where adult crime, adult time will bite. It's one of the few offences I think it will make a difference, and that is the mandatory life. That these kind of offenders who think they can go out and act with impunity will now be exposed to life imprisonment.
Yeah, and that's good for any crimes committed since the Crisafulli government came into power. Tell me, Terry, did the government have the power to make the adult crime, adult time laws retrospective? And if so, why didn't they?
Look, they could have. I mean, it's very seldom you see them make laws retrospective because we have, as a guiding principle of our law, criminal law in particular, that your actions should be judged by the law of the day. And that means that, you get judged in terms of what was the current situation at that point in time, rather than, punishing people with new laws for actions they did in the past when it wasn't that way. So I'd probably agree with them not making it retrospective in that regard. I think they could have come under some heavy criticism there from certain sections of society, the law fraternity in particular. We'll just have to deal, I guess, with the fact that they're now in place and move forward with that. But they can still appeal this matter. I mean, for a youth crime matter, generally the Youth Justice Act under Section 227 sets that the child must serve 70% of the detention. Now, the judges actually use their discretion to lower that to 60%. So that's where I see the problem comes in. If the sentence had been the sentence and not had this reduction in terms of time served, I think most people would have accepted that. Where the issue has come in the fact it's been reduced to 60%. And, we may well see more of that in terms of under the adult crime, adult time laws, because unfortunately the Crisafulli government has actually removed any percentage requirement for youth offenders to serve and left that at the discretion of judges now. So I think we'll see many more cases for other offences that are not mandatory where judges will set extraordinarily low thresholds for serving in terms of the sentence given.
Well, I'm not sure they will, but that's a whole different discussion. on that. But, I mean, Lee Lovell, who lost his own wife to a teen offender on Boxing Day, he says he doesn't understand why release at 60% is an automatic, and he has a point.
Well, yeah, I mean, 70% is the automatic release. This is actually underneath that, which the judge can make that determination. Well, look, I think what you've seen is the judge has weighed up the sentencing issues that they look at. That's the type of offence, the seriousness of it, the criminal history of the individual involved, the need to hold the child accountable, etc., and rehabilitation versus community protection and the rights of the victim. And what we have seen change in recent years is that rather than focusing on rehabilitation and the rights of the offender, we've seen an increase in terms of community protection and rights of the victim. And I guess this kind of sentence would seem to the community on a wider level would say, well, we're going back to looking after the offender and not focusing on what the victim's family or the community would be expecting.
Well, I'm reading some of the comments from Justice Bowskill now, and comments like said the boy's guilty plea showed he'd had taken responsibility for his actions after DNA results proved he'd been inside Mrs. White's car. I mean, you can take responsibility for your actions afterwards, but you actually took a life. And Justice also went on to say, also accept that you feel ashamed for what you've done. At the end of the day, there's still a grandmother who's dead, and a family doesn't have a grandmother or a mother or a wife. And I still feel, Terry, that the perpetrator is the victim in these cases. And that's something we've just got to get out of our system. You pointed to the government's adult crime, adult time laws. If those laws had applied here, what sentence? Well, we talked about minimum 20 years, right? But to life?
Yeah, that's right. It would have been 20 years before he would have been eligible for parole. So, you're seeing basically a doubling of the sentence he would have had to do before he could get out. And that's a big difference.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting, a lot of people argue, prison doesn't stop crime, etc. There's a 2021 report by the Productivity Commission, and it clearly states that the literature has consistently found that incapacitation through incarceration leads to significant reductions in crime. So that'll be the kind of rally call you hear from people saying, more prison doesn't do anything, it doesn't do this, incarceration doesn't stop crime. Government reports would refute that.
Yeah, well, there's new reports out at the moment. A new government report is urging all jurisdictions to loosen their bail laws. It says jail should be a last resort and kids should automatically get bail. Is this completely out of step with reality?
Yeah, well, there's a reason that crime's a state function under the Constitution, not a federal one, probably because they have very little understanding of the nuances of it. Look, we know in Queensland, for instance, the Atkinson report, when it came out, showed us that youth offenders, more than 50% were reoffending on bail. 9% of those were committing offences that resulted in death or GBH. So you must keep the community protected. You can do the rehabilitation after the sentencing, etc. You can do the diversions before they offend. In the middle is the offending cycle, and the community protection is paramount there. And if you look at recent data that came out this week, we are getting traction in Queensland. We're seeing serious repeat offenders decline from 460 down to 370, a 17% reduction. So it is working. Crime is starting to go down in Queensland, or at least stabilise. Victoria will work this out eventually.
What's your take on that as a professor? What is your take on that Victorian? I find it ridiculous. What is it? Adult time for violent crime? And then are we relying on the judges to work out what's violent? Is there a scale? I mean, I find that useless.
Well, Victoria seems to be quite confused. On one hand, they're saying they should be responsible and held accountable, and they kind of cherry-pick some offences for that. Yet, on the other hand, they've raised the age of criminal responsibility up to the age of 12, and we're going to do it to 14, but they're now not going to because they're too scared. And yet we've got three sets of data from Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria that tells us we hardly send any 10 to 14-year-old offenders to jail, which is the whole premise of raising the age of criminal responsibility. So Victoria, I think, will not improve in any shape or form in the next year or so. They have to really have a good think about how they're going to approach addressing their crime issues, because they're probably where we were 2 years ago.
Yeah. Professor Terry Goldsworthy from Bond University, I appreciate your time on 4BC Mornings this morning and just explaining all this for us. I appreciate it, mate.
Thank you.
No worries. There you go.